a life and a day at a developmental training center, the one that I worked at in 1977 to 1980 was Muscatatuck State Developmental Center in southern Indiana, and it was actually a farm colony at Fort Wayne State Developmental Center, and people from Fort Wayne came there and actually helped build that facility. They quarried stone and actually helped plant the orchards and different things. And of course, early on, the facilities were self-sustaining. They raised their own cows, pigs, milk, virtually everything. But when I came, there was a movement away, from that. We still had, some an orchard and different things. I worked on the behavior mod unit, and that's what it was called, and it had 2 floors of about 30 people on each floor, big day rooms, locked units, locked timeout rooms, timeout rooms that were not only locked but just checked every 15 minutes or so. There may be a mat in the timeout room, and that really was it. 40 years ago, we're locked in isolated areas, what we called timeout rooms. We used everything from rollerboards to 4-way restraints to restraint chairs that were in the middle of an open area where other people were around them. So not only were they restrained, but they, it was undignified to be out there, maybe even unsafe if, another resident would attack them or something. Chemical restraints, was prevalent. Medication authorized for other than a psychiatric diagnosis. The day rooms were plastic Dixon chairs, if they were like a plastic molded chair that was very durable, not very attractive, but very durable, and maybe a picnic table, so it couldn't get tumped over or used as a weapon, and so it's pretty stark environment. None of the units were air conditioned, as an example, and I can remember some really, really hot days doing rounds. Just fans blowing hot air across rooms of people in cribs or beds that were really severely involved. When people lived in institutions, they would all get up at the same time, a ward of maybe 30 or 35 people, and they would have slept in dormitories with maybe 30 beds in a big room. That was very common. They had gang showers, so if you were to go in to bathe in the morning or whatever, there'd be gang showers. The toilets were commodes that didn't have toilet seats. They had formed porcelain rings that were seats, and so it was very depersonalizing, I think, may be a way of describing it. And so most of the kitchens for breakfast, they had to walk to the kitchen. And they'd walk over in groups, and they'd get their metal trays and sit at picnic table kind of arrangements, but they were all fixed to the floor, so they couldn't be turned over or whatever. And there were a lot of really good staff at the facility, very caring, dedicated staff. And so they may have some therapy sessions, or they may have maybe bowling or an exercise class or a weightlifting class, or there were libraries at the facilities, and the vast majority of people stayed right there on grounds, and then lunch would be the same. They'd get their medication by, everybody get their medication the same time. They'd line up to get their medication. They'd have their name called out. I mean, it was really kind of very, very demoralizing, I would think. So the day was pretty, could be active, but a lot of people honestly stayed on the unit or spent a lot of time on the unit. And I can still smell the units where they allowed smoking, and patients were given what was called Hoosier tobacco that was grown by the prisons. And they came in these little white pouches with papers, and they'd roll their own cigarettes. And many of the people had nicotine-stained hands that you just can't imagine. But there was a Lake County, they had two Lake County units because Lake County is a large populated area, and it was set up on a geographic system. So everybody from Lake County were on these two buildings. But the smoke was so thick. I mean, it was thicker than any place you've ever been in. And they had these automatic lighters on the wall that people could go over and punch, and it would kind of light up, and not a flame, but it would, kind of like an old cigarette lighter in a car kind of thing. But so that was kind of the life of a person, during the day, and some of the activities that they were involved in.